Okay, so the plan here is to go ahead and go throughout the entire course of 1.3 notes. We're going to go through the entire course of notes 1.4 on Friday, and that will conclude all of Unit 1. And so be ready for a test on Monday of some sort. So we're going to try to figure that out, at least this first unit. So with 1.3, there again, we are going to talk about in the I can statement evaluating how debates on power and authority between the Federalist and Anti-Federalist have helped shape government in the United States over time. So in 1.3, just to sort of refresh us as far as where we was with 1.2, we've created the Constitution. Okay, we've put all these ancient documents, different governments in yesteryear, the ideas from British Parliament, the influence of Renaissance period. We put all of that in the development and the creation of the Constitution, these political philosophers. We put all this into the Constitution. Now the question is how do we ratify it, or how do we approve it? All right? And you've got a certain group that is in favor of the Constitution because they want a stronger central government, but you've got another group that is opposing the Constitution because they are in favor of a weaker central government and more power belonging to the states. So this is going to be the first time that you're going to see here an opposition between the two political parties. And yes, the two political parties that we had first in our country were the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist. So you are going to have to be able to differentiate between the two. So not long after the Constitution was sort of in the developmental stage and sort of, the framework and the foundation was created, debates began to manifest or show themselves, and they would erupt throughout the 13 states as to whether the new Constitution should replace the Articles of Confederation. So the Federalists, those who supported the ratification or the approval of the Constitution. Most of this group, the Federalist Party, are going to be more educated, more wealthier classes. They're going to include leaders like John Adams, George Washington, and Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, among others. So you need to know that the Federalist Party, there again, as you see here, are going to be supporters of the Constitution. They're going to be in favor of a strong central government. And there again, nobody as far as the political parties here is right or wrong. Some just asking for stronger government, more government than what they had under the Articles of Confederation. The Anti-Federalists are a little fearful for that because there again, they don't want the central government to become too powerful, that there again, that it would become oppressive. So, there again, you've just got two different ways of seeing things. And it's probably best for the condition of the country at this time to have two political parties with differing opinions, because it's going to help things to get balanced through the means of compromise. So as it was in this time period, it is going to take compromise between both political parties to get the Constitution passed. It's the same way it is today. It takes compromise between Democrat and Republican to be able to get issues passed in Congress. And please remember, eventually these two political parties will morph into what we refer to today as the Democrat and Republican parties. But just remember about the Federalists, they're in favor of the Constitution, want a strong central government. Most of these people are elites in society, wealthy, high-end people. The Anti-Federalists, on the other hand, would favor a weaker central government. They were in favor of stronger state legislatures. Not all of them liked the Articles of Confederation, but none of them wanted the new Constitution either. They felt that the Constitution was way too powerful as far as the strength of the central government. So generally from the poorer classes in the West, but also with the support of patriots like Sam Adams, Patrick Henry, the Anti-Federalists feared that a strong central government meant would one day destroy the liberties Americans had won in the Revolutionary War. So they particularly didn't like the fact that the new Constitution didn't provide any specific rights for the people. They didn't feel like that they were detailed enough. So here's what they wanted in the Constitution. they wanted, very important that you can see that, they want a Bill of Rights in the Constitution, a specific mentioning of rights in order to protect the people from the government. And so there again, nobody's right, nobody's wrong. You're just seeing how that they're going to debate. You're going to see how they're going to compromise to get the Constitution to pass. And that really is the most important situation here during this time period in the late 1780s. So they have to get this completed. All right, but know the two political parties who are debating one another in order to pass the Constitution. So it's a tremendous argument over power. Your supporters, of course, Alexander Hamilton. There again, he is a heavy promoter of the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson is a big promoter of the Anti-Federalist Party. He's probably the biggest leader. He felt the Constitution gave too many rights to the federal government and not enough rights to the people. So James Madison was for a stronger national government, there again consisting of three branches. So there again, those are your sort of three notable or major players, when it comes to, the sides or the stance as far as, for the Constitution and against the Constitution. So there again, just know and be noted of your supporters. Now, both sides are going to propagate. Both sides are going to use propaganda to try to sway public opinion. Most notable is the Federalist Papers used by the Federalist Party. Now, the Anti-Federalists had their own issues as far as propaganda pieces, but what you need to know is the Federalist Papers. So as debates continued to rage in the Anti-Federalist stronghold of New York to support the Constitution, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay would publish a series of anonymous essays known as the Federalist Papers. It written as, there again, propaganda. These essays extol the benefits of a strong central government and allayed fears about any loss of civil liberties. Basically, these essays are informing the public, look, you're not going to have to give up, any civil liberties. Historians and political scientists regard the essays well written, extremely persuasive, as some of the finest writings on the Constitution and republicanism. So there again, propaganda piece, a way to sway public opinion, to encourage people to support the U.S. Constitution. Okay, so very important that you know that the Federalist Papers used by the Federalist Party to gain support for the Constitution. All right, we move on. All right, so the first piece of compromise we come to, there again, to get the Constitution to pass, it is one big compromise. All right. So we talk first about the first element of compromise here, and that is the Great Compromise. Now, at the meetings, delegates would eventually settle on what would be referred to as the Great Compromise. All right, so they're at a meeting here, and you've got delegates from large states, you've got delegates from small states. So here's what comes about. A delegate from a larger state, such as Virginia at this time, stands up and says that, in order to establish representation, in order to be able to know how much congressmen we're going to have for our state, the large state plan springs forward with the Virginia plan, and a person who's part of that state is going to stand up and say, we believe that the state population should determine its number of representatives. The small states, of course, going to object to this because they're not always going to, of course, have the population to compete with a larger state. Therefore, they're not going to have as many representatives, and so they're always going to be outvoted on certain issues. That was referred to as the Virginia Plan. Very important that you know the workings of the Virginia Plan. Believe that all representation should be based on a state's population. So, of course, the larger state, the most populous state, is always going to have more representation, and the small state says not fair. So somebody else comes, as far as the small state, a delegate, and says, well, we believe that we have an idea as far as how to keep equity in representation, and that would be through the New Jersey plan. So the way that they looked at it would be that state legislatures would, they're going to have equal representation. a one-house legislature. Each state would have an equal number of votes, regardless of population. So just give every state an equal amount of representation, or congressman, and all is fair. So they couldn't come to an agreement on this. Virginia plan says no to the New Jersey and vice versa. So what do? They have to be able to appease both large state and small state. Remember, the most important thing here is passing the Constitution. So what do? They merge the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan together. Okay, very important that you're able to see that. So what are they going to do? They're going to say, well, let's appease, let's satisfy the large state plan, and let's satisfy the small state plan. Let's establish a bicameral Congress or a two-house legislature. So we're going to create the House of Representatives, and it would be based on a state's population. Okay, that's why California has 53 House Representative members, and North Carolina has, I think, 13. Why is that? Because there again, populations vary. So of course it's only form-fitting that California would have more House members than North Carolina, because they have a bigger population. All right, so that appeases the Virginia plan. Virginia, and other larger states say, all right, we like that. And so they're also going to create another house, okay? In the Senate, each state would have 2 senators regardless of its population. So this is pleases the small state plan. And so they're all on board with it and say, okay, we'll be down with that. We'll have 2 senators for every state. So there again, even to this day, regardless if you're a small state or a large state, there are 2 U.S. senators for every state. All right, and there again, this is the great compromise. All right, so make sure you know this compromise to get the Constitution passed. It is very important that you're able to see that. There again, this etches us a step closer to getting the Constitution passed. The next question we have is, how do we count state population? There again, your southern states have slaves. Your northern states object to the fact that we count slaves as population. So even at this early date, the slavery issue divided the northern and southern states. States with large slave populations wanted slaves to count as people on the official census, and the census is taken every 10 years to, of course, get a state's population. So they wanted them to count as people on the official census so that they could have more representatives in the House. All right, states with smaller populations wanted to exclude slaves altogether. So there again, the southern state wants slaves as property, but also want to count them as people when figuring a state population. More population, more representatives. More representatives, the more that you can continue to fight for the cause of slavery. The northern states, of course, are going to object to say that this gives the southern states more population, therefore giving them more representation. So what do? It's about getting the Constitution to pass. So what do? They come up with the 3/5 compromise. It is going to count each slave as 3/5 of a person when a state's population was calculated. So for example, 4,000 slaves would only count as 2,400 people. So we get the southern state to agree with this, we get the northern state to agree, and we're moving one step closer for the approval of the U.S. Constitution. Make sure that you know that the 3/5 compromise is one of the compromises to get the Constitution to pass. It does show that slavery was a secondary thought at this time. All right. Most important situation here is the Constitution. Now, should they have dealt with the slave issue? Probably should have. That's going to cost this country, several years later. It's going to cause big problems. But Constitution is priority at this particular time as far as their opinion is concerned. So another compromise settled, so to speak. All right, so this is going to establish the Constitution. It would replace the Articles of Confederation, September 17, 1787. A committee of 39 delegates would sign the Constitution. In 1790, all 13 states would have ratified the Constitution. Okay, so make sure you are aware of that. And just make sure that you know that there again, the U.S. Constitution will replace the Articles of Confederation. So we're looking at another compromise here, this clause in the Constitution. Now, the Anti-Federalists are reading the Constitution, and they're reading this particular clause. And the statement says that the Constitution allows Congress to make all laws that are necessary and proper for carrying out the listed powers. So basically what that means is even if it's not specifically mentioned, okay, the government can still, what you would say, use power in certain areas to carry out what is necessary and proper. So you got to know, there are expressed powers mentioned in the Constitution, powers that are specifically mentioned. Okay, there are implied powers, and that's what that's talking about, is implied. Not necessarily mentioned, but it's implied that the government can be able to do what they feel like is necessary. All right, so for example, the chartering of banks is not expressly mentioned in the Constitution, but there are things that you can sort of take as implied. And what they're saying here is this, that the federal government has the ability through the elastic clause, and we know what elastic does, it stretches. The federal government has the ability to stretch its power, okay, to be able to do what is proper and necessary, okay. So the Anti-Federalists really don't like that. Well, how far can it stretch? You know, that would be the question that they would ask themselves. And so it's really causing them to be reserved in supporting the Constitution, because there again, when you start talking about the government stretching its power, it scares the Anti-Federalists to death, because they already think that there again, that there's too much power to the federal government anyway. All right, so there again, under the Constitution, there is the elasticity in its power, and therefore they can stretch the power. Such, for example, the usage of including the chartering of banks, the definitions of crimes and punishments, and currency regulations. Eventually, the Federalists will be able to get the Bank of the United States, something that the Anti-Federalists oppose. But how will they get it? They will get it through really the necessary and proper clause. The Anti-Federalist arms and their hands, so to speak, is going up, and they're going to go on the defense. So in order to, what you would say, combat the elastic clause, they're going to push for something that will guarantee civil liberties to be implemented. Know that about the elastic clause. There again, federal government has the ability to stretch power. It is mentioned there, and it has been used on frequent occasion. But in order to combat that, the Anti-Federalist is going to push for, the next note, a Bill of Rights. Okay, very important. Anti-Federalists in New York finally agreed to ratify the Constitution as long as the new Congress would amend the Constitution and outline specific rights and liberties reserved for the people. Okay, so, we will go along, the Anti-Federalists say, with your elastic clause as long as you guarantee a Bill of Rights placed in the Constitution. Now, the Federalists would argue that the Constitution limits the government's power, so a list of rights is not necessarily needed, but they're not convinced. They want a specific mentioning of rights that belong to the people. All right? So, there again, this too is a compromise, and the Federalists say, okay, we will give you the Bill of Rights, and we will put those specific mentionings in the Constitution if you will agree to the Constitution. So, that's exactly what happened. Congress would ratify the bill as the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, including there again amendments number 1 through 10. So by 1791, 3/4 of the states had ratified the amendments, and so now we have an agreement on both sides as far as the U.S. Constitution. And there again, here are your Bill of Rights. All right, first 1 through 5. First Amendment passes or protects freedom of religion, speech, and the press, The Second Amendment, which guarantees the right to bear arms. There again, third, restricts quartering houses of federal troops. The troop can't come into your house, of course, without a form of permission. That wasn't the case during the American Revolution. Protects citizens, number 4, against unreasonable searches and seizures. There again, you got to have a search warrant before you can enter into a person's home. You can't be tried for any serious crime without a grand jury meeting to decide whether there's enough evidence for a trial. If there's not enough evidence, then there will be no trial. Okay, all of these are your personal freedoms and protections, so to speak, and rights that you have that will protect you every day of your life. So it's very important that these are in here. Okay, I know, like I said, nobody's wrong and or right in this situation. It's these two political parties and the brilliant minds behind both political parties working together to be able to create what has been very successful. 6 provides rights for the accused, such as a public and speedy trial, extends the right to a trial by jury in civil cases, protects people found guilty of a crime. Simply states, number 9, that the rights specifically mentioned in the Bill of Rights are not necessarily the only ones enjoyed by the people of the United States. So there's an extension of the Bill of Rights. 10, powers reserved for the states, and you're definitely going to need to know number 10, granting certain authority to the states, such as education. So this implies federalism. Number 10, there's power that belongs to the federal government, there's power that belongs to the states. We've now passed the Constitution because the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists have compromised, and this leads to the passing of the U.S. Constitution. All right, so be ready for 1.4 notes tomorrow.